My name is Joe, and welcome to this three-part series on using jQuery along with CSS transitions to add some animation to a navigation. In this video, I'll be walking you through the basic HTML structure and through all of the CSS pseudocode that I've added to get us started with the project. Now, during my initial search for a good working example on animating the nav, I came across dozens of sites and blogs. Found this one of particular interest. Perhaps it was the awe-inspiring mountains and clear blue skies that caught my eye. But needless to say, this one made it to the top of my list. Now, the best way to approach any project, especially in the world of web development, is to first work out the logic, which usually involves writing pseudocode. But before we do that, let's take a moment to work through the animation to get a better idea of what we're looking to accomplish, and then we'll examine the pseudocode that I put together. As we can see, the landing page sets the initial state of the nav when the page loads, which then transitions as we scroll down and hit a certain breakpoint. And that breakpoint is set at 100 pixels for this specific site. As we can then see, the nav is repositioned and fixed to the top. And background color was added along with the anchor tags having their font color change from black to white. The transition is then returned back to its default state, or the nav is returned back to its default state once we scroll down and hit that breakpoint again. So here we go, one complete, up, and then down. So it's a nice transition, smooth transition. Now the changes themselves are accomplished by assigning and removing one of two classes. And the actual property values that we're targeting are padding, background, and font color. So it's a very basic layout with only a few moving parts, which makes it relatively easy to implement, and in a way gives the site an enhanced cool factor. So before we jump into the actual demo and pseudocode, let's take a look at the final design that I've gone ahead and created. A link has also been provided in the comments so that you can see firsthand for yourself and examine the code in more depth. Now this design is almost identical to the other side. However, I'm adding some padding to the nav and pushing them towards the center. So as we go up and we hit that breakpoint, you can see the nav is fixed to the top, and background color is added, and the font color to the navigation elements themselves are changed once again. So really, almost identical, just some additional padding. So before we get into the actual demo itself, the pseudocode, let's take a look at the HTML that I've decided to pre-populate in order to speed things up. So let's look at the head, and specifically in the head, we're going to look at this link tag. Now, I've gone ahead and decided to import reset CSS so that we can remove any of the default styling on our page. The only JS library that we need to import, and it's pretty key in this demo, is jQuery. So we're going to go ahead and import jQuery. That pretty much ends our head tag. Let's move into the body. In the body, we have the header. Now, the header contains usually introductory content along with the site navigation. So it makes sense to kind of position our nav in here. We're using a standard approach towards navigation by leveraging UL, LIs, and anchor tags. I've also taken the liberty to position the H1, which will represent our site logo or site name, in the nav so that that transitions along with the nav itself. Besides that, I've just added this active class to the first LI. And I basically did that to kind of notify our users of what their current location is, so as they move throughout the site. And eventually, we would add some code so that when they do click on the responsive or design links, the active class would be removed and reassigned. Same concepts that we're using here for transitioning. We could implement some of them towards adding remove the active class. So that's pretty much wraps up our HTML, except the last one would be the section. I've added this section to give the page some height so that as we scroll down, we actually have some area to scroll. So now that we have the basic HTML structure defined, let's move into our CSS and review the comments and pseudocode that I put in place. So I've added at the very top this reusable layout classes. And in our case, this is going to contain our clearfix class, which we will set on any parent elements that contain floated items, specifically the nav, because it's going to contain a floated UL and floated LIs. The next is the animations section, and this is, we're going to set all our animation property values here, which really are going to affect just the nav and the anchor tags. We have the header, which we are going to set our background pick and its position along with its height. I've added a pick here, which we will then add some additional properties to kind of give it height and position it in a way that I think looks best. Then we move on to the nav, where we set the background color and the padding. H1, where we'll set the font size and font color. UL, where we will float that right. LIs, which we will float left, as well as define a hover state so that the users know which navigation link they are actually hovering over. Anchor tags to set where we're going to set our padding and font color, as well as bind it to our active class so the user knows which link is active. The section, where we'll define the height so that we have room to scroll. Large class that contains all the properties and values for the default state, and then the small class that contains all the properties and values for the transition state. So now that we've covered all of the pseudocode and HTML in this video, the next video will jump right into adding the appropriate CSS in order to start making these changes.